My name is Emma Para. So excited to be back in 2025 with you all. And we have an amazing new roster of change makers lined up to interview through the year. But we're starting off our first edition for the year today with our special guest, Lee Chambers, who's a business psychologist and author and founder and CEO of Male Allies UK. Lee's diverse career has led from corporate finance to building and exiting a tech company, with his current focus on the very successful work that he is doing in supporting organizations with inclusive well-being and promoting allyship and intersectionality. Lee has been featured on the Status 100 Index, having received a Great British Entrepreneur Award, and he currently sits on the board of CMI Women, Regenerate UK, and the Manchester Metropolitan University Business School. He is the first Black British scientist to have received a Cavill Fellowship from the National Academy of Sciences in the UK, in the US, apologies, Lee, for his work in health inequalities, and also the 2023 UN Women Changemaker of the Year. He's an ambassador for the United Kingdom government's Lilac Review for Disabled Entrepreneurship and speaks globally on allyship and intersectionality, having also recently published his latest book, Momentum: 13 Ways to Unlock Your Potential. Today's talk celebrates the importance of building momentum, and you are certainly bringing a very special perspective to this, Lee. Welcome. It's a great honor to have you with us today.
And it's a pleasure to be joining everyone this evening, Emma.
Thank you. Lee's a friend to the AFB, but obviously you are someone that quite a few people on the call today are coming to meet or to realize your impact for the first time. And you've really enjoyed a very diverse career, having built your own momentum in different directions, and you are definitely still going. But just out of interest, what did the younger Lee want to be?
Yeah, so when I was younger, I was curious. I found interest in topics such as geography. So I was always fascinated by places and cultures. I enjoyed history, understanding the mistakes we'd made as humans, how we got to where we were. I was mathematically gifted, and I struggled with words. So, to be honest, in many ways, I wasn't really sure. At one point, I had ideas of becoming an industrial chemist. Uh, Another time, I had a more kind of entrepreneurial thought of actually running a business. There was times I also thought maybe I could be or work in philosophy or philanthropy or something where I had the chance to think. Because I've always considered myself a bit of a soup of an individual, kind of part scientist, part business person, and part thinker. Um, Obviously, as a young boy, you also have grand ideas of, oh, maybe I'll be a race driver. Maybe I'll be. Apparently, there's a story of my mother saying that I wanted to be a bus driver because I thought that you got to take the money home after you paid your fares. So yeah, I think if anything, I had lots of thoughts, but truth be told, I never really knew what I wanted to do. And even when I went to university, I picked a very broad degree with a wide variety of units so I could continue to explore. And I'm 20 years into my career now. I'm probably only just starting to get a real idea of what I'm potentially capable of and where my skills best lie, because the world continually changes as well. So yeah, I think that on the journey to kind of find out what you resonate with, what maybe you don't enjoy so much, what you're good at, but also what you're good at, but maybe don't enjoy so much. I think it's been, yeah, a real journey of exploration and experimentation. And I think that sometimes people have a very defined idea of what they want to do. And whether that comes from their own values or things that their parents or community have suggested would be best for them, I think very few people choose their career path based on the career service in schools, because historically it definitely wasn't very comprehensive or considerate. From what I hear from people today, it's hard to even predict what a future career is going to be, given the world is becoming more fluid and moving at speed. So yeah, it's a long answer to a short question, Emma.
No, I mean, you're clearly someone who has been very curious about things. And, obviously we're going to see a lot of that in our conversation with you about just your ideas around just the normative patterns that we tend to use in mapping out our careers. I think I heard you talking about being a child and wanting to rip a Commodore 64 in bits and study it. And I think that just shapes the person that you are today in terms of how many different directions that you've allowed your mind to travel down. But obviously we within the AFB are quite focused on leadership evolution. So can you just talk us through the start of your own journey to unlocking your leadership potential?
Yeah, so I think it's a really interesting question, because I've had some reflections on this, even in more recent times, as I've written my book, around at what point did I really engage and started to feel like I had leadership potential? Because I definitely
Mm,
think when I was younger, growing up on an estate from a lower socioeconomic background, and being in a community with very, very few black individuals around me, you kind of do in some ways assimilate to cultures around you. And because of where I was based and because this was kind of pre-internet, all the leaders that I saw were white people. And I got very little perspective of what was happening in the global world until I was a bit older and a bit more curious. And I reflected back and thought about the very history that I was, fascinated about at school. And in GCSE history, what did I learn? The world wars like 5 times, British kings and queens, all these parts of history, some ancient history, the Egyptians, that got me fascinated about, different cultures leading. But the first time I really thought about my own kind of concept of leadership was actually in A-level history, when all of a sudden we stepped out of, taking the history of conflict, because that's pretty much what you learn in school. It's all about war after war after war after war, after warlord after emperor after king, and how they just all fought each other, and empires rose and empires fall. But it was always about fighting. Uh, in my A-level history, I did firstly about the American Civil Rights Movement, and also about feminism in the UK, suffragettes, suffragists. And all of a sudden, I was studying a history of activism, not conflict. And that was a point in my life where I actually started to think, I can formulate a message, deliver a message, and inspire people through this in a way that I'd never really considered before. And it took me time to really start to realize just how I might be able to do that. I think that in some ways is the very seeds of the work that I do today. Um, but even at university, because I was the first one in my extended family to go, and ended up dropping out halfway through, struggling with, some mental health challenges and just that adolescent adult transition that so many of us go through. I think my own leadership potential, in terms of understanding that leadership is in many ways a title that's assigned to people, but leadership isn't actually that title. It's the impact that you have on others. And it also took me a bit of time to realize that I actually was leading myself every day. We all lead ourselves every day. In fact, in many ways, to be an effective leader, we do need to lead ourselves first. And I did come to a realization that, especially in my earlier career, when I was in organizations as a very junior employee and felt a long way from leadership, that actually everyone was leading something, whether inside work or out of work. And actually, that was quite liberating and allowed me to go and set up my first business, where then technically, by hierarchical structure, I was the leader. But that didn't suddenly make me proficient at leadership, because the first 5 years of building that business was incredibly difficult, incredibly stressful. I made a lot of mistakes. I was young, I was naive, and yeah, that kind of leadership was fundamentally built more often than not from the things that went wrong rather than the things that went right. And I'm quite transparent that, that business was so successful that I actually became fearful of my own success. It almost started to chase me, and I felt like at some point it would just all go wrong. So, yeah, my kind of concept around leadership is you really do define it over time. You realize just how wide leadership truly is, because you might be a leader in your community, you might be a leader in your family, you might be a leader in your interests, you might be a leader, vocally, how you act, what you write, how you communicate. So much more to it than the title and yeah, the email signature that people think is a leader, and also which leaders get platformed and which leaders don't. Because we all know historically there's been some people who've been incredibly powerful leaders, and yet their voices have been muted because they didn't fit the narratives that were wanted. And I do feel that that's a conversation that we all kind of step back and reflect on, especially given the month that we're in the US and the month that will come in the UK later this year, but not to forget that we're not just a month of existence. There's a hell of a lot of history.
That's really, I mean, a few things here, honestly, just regarding your ability to step back and understand that the vulnerability that you dealt with as a junior was actually a strength, and being able to use that as the courageous tool to go out and build something. I mean, we will get there. I do, however, want to ask, if you don't mind, the next question around leading through mental health, because you come with a unique perspective. You come with the understanding of the burden that young Black gifted people often bear, and you have had your own journey through discovering your neurodiversity and taking that on and being able to even stand as an ally now for young Black men who, in your time, there was no one like you. How has that been for you, being able to create this pattern of leadership, just being able to create this personality of a leader through your mental health struggles? Can you just share that with us?
Yeah, well, it's yeah, what I can honestly say, it's been hard. It's been hard. There are no easy paths in this work. So I think probably the first thing to kind of highlight is in those first 5 years of business, I was driven by doubt, the doubt of other people. A lot of people that doubted that a young black man from a lower socioeconomic background, without any safety nets, without a large network, without a lot of connections and industry knowledge, would be able to build something successful. And the truth is, I managed to build something that was successful against all that doubt and some systemic barriers and obstacles, some due to race, some due to class, some due to just being audacious enough to even try. In a time when entrepreneurialism wasn't glamorous in the slightest bit, the idea of getting a profession was what was expected, both from the external world and from the very community that I was in as well. Um, that took its toll. And in many ways, that was a catalyst for my physical health challenges as well, where I had to learn to walk again and kind of navigate a pretty challenging kind of health journey. That definitely put me in a place where I had to reflect and realize that actually that massive drive for Black excellence was actually putting my health at risk. And it's such a fine balance. But I actually had to come to an acceptance at one point that I couldn't be black excellence all the time. Sometimes I just have to be black good enough. And
Good enough for today.
yes, exactly. And the thing is, that gave me, it removed some of that perfectionist tendency. It gave me more space to explore. And it also gave me some forgiveness and some grace that I wasn't going to get a 10 out of 10 every day because that's just not realistic. And that's helped me recover and find a much better equilibrium with things. But also, that suddenly gave me the space to be more transparent and more vulnerable about the challenges I was going through. It's always a fine balance when you're building a company and you're seen as a leader, because there will be stakeholders who will judge you if you appear to have anything that might make you potentially seen as unstable or unreliable, or you might make rash or naive decisions. The truth is, we all have our own challenges, and the expectations placed upon us quite often as black professionals are higher. And I think it's, the barriers are higher in the first place. And we do perform. We are excellent. Some of the rhetoric out there at the minute about going back to merit, I mean, damn, if we actually operate truly on merit, we're right there. I mean, we really are right there, at the start line, ready to go. Um, but no, I think to kind of bring it all the way back round, Emma, I didn't get an autism diagnosis until I was 36. But always kind of known I was a bit different, kind of perceive things a different way, uh, would see things in different angles and pull different things together and join dots where other people just never really saw any connection there. So I've always known I was a little bit unique. Um, but I think even within that, in our own community, it's been a challenge. I mean, I'll be honest, my mum still doesn't really like talking about it because it's like she sees it as, well, it's just another thing, and it's nothing to do with my parenting. Um, and that's just how it is. I think, sometimes again, you wish for that perfection and like full fundamental acceptance. But we live in a world full of nuance, full of challenge. And actually, when I had to learn to walk again, I really learned a lot about myself. It really gave me a chance to stop and reflect about the impact that I was making, about who I was with some of those societal expectations and doubts pulled away from me. And that, allowed me to then decide to take that decision to be a stay-at-home father to my two children. And again, I faced judgment. And it's really funny because as a black father in Britain, with many of the stereotypes that float around, turning up at baby and toddler groups and being, a full-on primary caregiver, again, it was pushing against those stereotypes in a positive way. And it was powerful because it helped other people see that actually, firstly, fathers can be primary caregivers and be incredibly actively engaged with the children, and that actually remove the demographics, just let fathers, care for the children. We want to be there, and we can kind of sit back here and laugh. And I say, on one side, I built a company, and on the other side, I was a stay-at-home father to my two children for 3 years. Which one made me a better leader, Emma? It wasn't the boardroom; it was the baby room.
Toddlers will do that to you. They will challenge every single decision that you make for their own safety and well-being. But no, this is amazing because, you're talking about having to live past certain labels. And I mean, for me, I think there's a loneliness in representation because, on one hand, you're this ace, amazing, rising young black man who is the entrepreneur to watch out for. And then on the other hand, you're having to, again, create representation in another area where you have to show people that this is what a black father can look like. I know that you've described yourself as a contrarian.
Hmm.
Now, just how much of that do you always need to factor into being able to build the momentum that people are seeking to just inject into their professional, even their personal lives?
Yeah, I think we all have within us a desire to explore and find out who we are and how we navigate this world. And the truth is, a lot of what we is built into us is from societal narratives, from, acceptable norms, quite often from the people we care about and the people we love. Our parents shape us significantly to then enter the world in a certain way. And many of us will have, grown up in childhoods where we were expected to be excellent. We're expected to find a profession and go and excel. We're expected to be committed and disciplined. A lot of expectations. And some of those expectations can be a little bit suppressive of being a little bit resistant, a little bit curious, a little bit questioning about things, and just a little bit of a, yeah, non-typical expectation of a person. And I've always been a little bit non-conformist, which, as you can imagine, as a child, got me in some really interesting conversations. It also got me into plenty of trouble. Um, if I think about, it, again in those two areas, I did face challenges in business based on my identity, but I was determined to show what I could do through my actions and through my impacts. Um, I kind of pushed on with that because what I wanted, I couldn't see who I wanted to be out there in the world. So I thought, if I can't see it, I'm going to have to do it myself, and hopefully that will inspire the next generation. What I actually realized is representation enough is not a lot, it's just not enough on its own. I actually then realized when I got ill that I had to step back and think about how could I remove some of the barriers that I'd had to climb over so that the next generation didn't have to face the same barriers that I did. That was a more effective way to give back because that would help other people build more momentum. Because my momentum was stopped every time I had to climb over a big obstacle or scale another barrier that came into my way. And I thought that this has slowed me down. Now, sometimes slowing down to reflect is really important, but when you're facing active resistance within a system, it suppresses your momentum. You just build up some speed, and then all of a sudden the friction comes, and you just feel yourself being slowed down. So, my realization across that in both aspects of my own life as I've kind of stepped into new places is don't just try and be the representation lead. Because when you were younger, you thought that would make a difference. People would see it and they'd think, I can do that too. And then lots of people come behind me and do a lot more amazing things than me. Now, that still has happened, but not as many people as I thought. And I realized it's about removing, dismantling, lessening, reshaping some of those barriers, both in terms of working on the systems, but also supporting the next generation to be more skilled at getting over the barriers that are there anyway. And it's that when we talk about momentum, because some people have not that many barriers and obstacles to face, and therefore they naturally have more opportunity of keeping that momentum. But I suppose the last thing, Emma, is some other reflections that you can read about in the book, is that actually momentum can be can actually be an issue if you don't harness it correctly. And if anything, in my business, some of the momentum and speed that I picked up actually took me away from my own values. And it took time to actually move all the way back across to be in alignment. And sometimes, if we're not clear on where we want to get to and we build up some momentum, we actually end up moving in the wrong direction. And the more momentum you create, the further away you move from where you actually want to be moving towards. So momentum isn't always positive, and I think the best way to truly consider it is that movement and progress are two different things. So you might be moving quite quickly, but if you're not sure of your direction of travel, if you've not got that kind of bit of a moral compass out to make sure that it aligns with that value set and who you want to be, but who you aspire to be, you can find yourself moving away from where you want to go. And it's not until you stop and get your head up do you actually see that. And I can definitely reflect on that from my own business. And I know that people probably want to know a little bit more about me learning to walk again, but I'll make it quick. My immune system failed. I was pretty much paralyzed. I was stuck in hospital for a month, where I then found that I simply couldn't really use my legs properly because I've been inactive, and it was incredibly painful when your body attacks yourself from the inside. Um, it gave me a lot of time to reflect on the things I'd not been grateful for. And it made me think about a lot of the things that realized that I didn't know if I was going to walk again, but I was determined to go on that journey to find out if I could. And I did that when I went into hospital. My son was 18 months old and my daughter was just about to be born. And it was my children, the desire to take my daughter's first steps with her, because she was born when I was in walking rehab. And all of a sudden, I had someone else to do it for through the pain, through the setbacks, through the feeling stiff and not wanting to do my physio, not go through all those challenging times that I faced. And I got back up on my feet and took my first steps with my daughter. You shared some of the kind of the accolades and recognition I've got at the start of this call. Taking those first steps with my daughter is the most proud moment of my life and probably will always be. But I do kind of laugh nowadays because she's now 10, and I've not really beat her much else since. So she very much keeps me on my toes. And yeah, it's just given me a chance to reflect on the fact that, we can go through an awful lot in life. But again, as you might see, if you take some time to purchase the book, the adversities that we go through quite often present the biggest lessons, the biggest learning, the deepest insights, and show us what we're capable of. And I can definitely say for me, the most insightful things that I've managed to glean as a human being that have been able to make a difference to other people and an impact to wider communities are from the things that didn't go right, that didn't go the way that I wanted, that I didn't predict would happen. And actually, you know, your adversity and your trauma can be something that gives you an awful lot more to then give to other people. And I think we sometimes forget that, especially in the moment.
That's incredible. I mean, being able to use the almost the lack of momentum to create impacts, that's such a it's a very rare perspective to have gone through a personal and health and even a professional challenge like that, just having that setback that just literally sets you back across the board, but still being able to create the impact that you want at the end of that episode. I mean, a lot of people don't always understand that that's where momentum can sometimes be centered into. And,
Mm.
just hearing you speak about it, I'm really hoping that people are able to sort of take a different view on what it is that we view as progress, as impact, as just moving forward. And hopefully that's just going to change quite a few perspectives on this call. I know that in your book you speak about control impacting momentum. Do you just want to share with us how you prescribe that we can reform our understanding of prioritizing control? I found that quite interesting, yeah, as part of your book.
Yeah. So I mean, there's a whole chapter on it. But I think what a lesson that I've had to learn, again, learn the hard way, is where do I spend my energy and where can I actually make an active difference? Um, I think in my younger life, I was sometimes quite selfish, sometimes wanted to really push forward, but for reasons of ego and reasons of, showing again other people that I could, some of that validation.
Mm,
And as I've got older, there's a realization that that will sometimes cause you to put a lot of energy into things that you can't control. Now, there are lots of external things happening in the world at the minute that are a massive burden and weight on our shoulders.
yeah.
And we've got to be honest and appreciate that. And it's not just this present moment, but especially the last 5 years have been pretty heavy. There's been some significant, whether we're talking about things that have impacted wider global perspectives, such as the pandemic, or specific things for our communities. And obviously, this year has started in, well, I mean, I don't, it's hard to find the terminology to express, but it feels like we're in the eye of the storm at the
Yeah.
minute. Um, I suppose what I've kind of found and what the lesson within that was is that if I spend my energy on things I can't control, what's the cost of that? What's the opportunity cost? Because technically, I could try and channel that energy on things I do have control over and things that I can influence. And it's actually always really quite powerful for us to take a step back and reflect on the things in our ecosystem, in our lives, and see, well, do we have direct control over enough to really put some energy in and create different outcomes? And what do we have influence over? What things do we care about? What things matter to us? What things align to our values that we might not have a lot of direct control over, but we have the ability to influence. And the more we can push on that influence, the more we might actually be able to create outcomes and impact that's meaningful to us. Because the more we put our energy into things we can't control, it kind of spins those wheels. We don't go anywhere. And that's not to say go and hide in a corner from all these external factors
Mhm.
because you can't do anything about them. That ends up becoming powerlessness and hopelessness. But finding that balance, because as human beings, we love to have a level of control over some things. And I know that sometimes when there's so many things that feel like they're being taken away, it almost feels like your control and your influence is also being reduced and minimized at the same time, which means it's even more important to consider some of the things that we can harness. And actually, sometimes in the wider external circumstances that make us feel true scarcity because we actually fundamentally feel quite scared. Um, there's still raindrops of abundance in the sky. And actually, we've got to find a little bit of that moisture out there, a little bit of that morning dew on the plants. It's still there, you know, in the eye of the storm, in the wind, and in, the constant battering that that we're receiving from being buffeted around by society's whims and wills. There's still those little droplets there. And I think if we can go and gather up some of those droplets, we'll find we have enough of that moisture to just keep us fresh so that when the sun does come back out, because everything works in a cycle. Like so many of these things are cyclical. For those of us that have been around for a while, we've seen it come, we've seen it go, we've seen it come back again. Uh, and yeah, everything works in rhythms, right? So yeah, my kind of focus around that was a lesson that actually, where do I want to channel that energy? And sometimes gathering some of that energy for you, especially what I found is speaking to a lot of black women over the years, just the mindset that's created around self-sacrifice, around looking after everyone else, around being willing to push beyond what was possible and break those stereotypes and narratives meant that there's a lot of black women I know they need to look after themselves more. And this is
Y-
true.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, it's very topical, in terms of what you speak about regarding hopelessness and just feeling like a loss of control, particularly in the times that we're in. We're obviously somewhere else in the world is celebrating Black History Month when we all know, in the US where that celebration is happening, that is also taking place alongside some very interesting discussions regarding DEI. It is admittedly very draining. It's admittedly, it feels like we're taking 1,000 steps backwards when we've barely even taken, 10 steps forward. So there is a worry, quite legitimate one, I would imagine, about how much of that attitude is going to seep down towards the UK. And we will lose the momentum within the AFB is just one organization. And of course, within the organizations that you work with and also champion, there is some admitted concern as to what's going to happen next. What's all this good work going to lead to? Do you have any views around what that challenge might look like and how we can overcome the temptation to just say, sod it, I've had enough of trying to fight the good fight.
Yeah, so probably got three perspectives on this, Emma. So firstly, the unfortunate reality is the winds always come across the Atlantic in some form. We don't get like the hurricane and the significant things that rip America apart. We always get the tail end of those storms. So we get 70-mile-an-hour winds, not 150-mile-an-hour winds, but we literally do get stuff coming across the Atlantic. So there are going to be some of those sentiments coming here. Luckily, we have different legal systems here. There are some quite stark differences. If you think about Black history in both places, there are differences, and communities are built in different ways. But I think we should all consider that some of that US influence will land on our shores and probably already has. And we're probably seeing that in people becoming more emboldened to say things that have become even, people have become more emboldened to say things that are fundamentally and overtly racist. And we've all known there's been systemic discrimination built into our systems and institutions, and a lot of that hasn't truly been addressed, if we're honest, even though there has been pockets of really good practice and difference being made. Uh, I think we do realise that there will be some challenges on the horizon. I think, secondly, think back again to what I said before about the cyclical nature of this. It does come and it does go. And I almost try and look at it and consider it in times of crisis when things are being shaken up. There is always opportunity. There is always opportunity to really see how we can step out of the madness and actually really forge a path that's meaningful to us. Sometimes there's an element of protection within that. And, I say this to a lot of black individuals in organizations, but for those of you that are leading the fight in your organization, don't feel guilty if you take a step back. I know in these times you feel like you have to dial down and do even more because the resistance is coming. But for each one of us, our mission to make a difference for professionals like ourselves has to be sustainable, it has to be intentional, and it has to be done in a way that you can continue to thrive in your everyday role. Because as frustrating as it is, that's what we're so often measured on as a metric. So it's really important that you don't feel guilty for not doing everything. And I know that sounds a little bit counterintuitive in these times because you feel like you need to do more, there's more to do, we've got to hold them back. But actually, are you being properly resourced to do it in the first place? Are you truly being backed? Is there clear understanding of why you're doing that? So I think actually, and sometimes it gives us a chance to reassess how much energy we're putting into this, what difference is actually being made, and are we doing it in a sustainable way that we can keep doing? Like, it's really important that we are sustainable activists because if we burn ourselves out, we're no good to ourselves, we're no good to other people either. But also in a real intentional way, knowing exactly what you need to get from this and exactly where you want to put that energy. And I think that that will make these times not easier, but they will make these times become more suitable for you to be able to navigate through. And I think finally, we're now going to move into a chapter where things get questioned more than ever. And we can look across the pond and be honest. One of the most qualified presidential candidates ever got referred to as a DEI hire. I mean, what kind of nonsense is this? What a joke. But that's the silliness of it all now on the surface. But what's really interesting is beyond the polarizing social media posts and the media covering yet another company that's divesting from DEI, no one's talking about the ones that have realized, wait a minute, this is our advantage. While all these other foolish people step away from it, we're gonna evolve what we're doing. We're gonna continue to tap into those communities who we know bring diverse ideas, that we know bring a lot of talent, that we actually know have excellence and intelligence woven into them. We're gonna focus on actually making sure we keep doing this. Because when the cycle comes back round, and those other companies who divested are like, damn, we should get back on this, inclusion work because all of a sudden our workforce looks the same and we're getting left behind. It's a good way to make yourself obsolete when you don't bring difference through the door because then you've got to work on your culture all over again. So, I mean, people might say, oh, Lee, God, you guys are such a naive way of looking at it. But I honestly feel that what's really interesting in is the attempts to kind of challenge inclusion initiatives are very strategic and very coordinated. And the whole media circus that goes around it is very quick to jump on any company of any size that said, we're gonna change what we're doing. And they make a nice headline about this company doesn't believe in DEI, says it needs to die, and all these other things. But actually, there's no airtime going to the companies who are doing more, who are reinvesting, who are actually thinking, what have we done that's been really effective? We're going to do more of that. And at the end of the day, their companies are just quietly getting that advantage that they know that happens when they do this properly. Because there are also the companies that didn't put black squares out in George Floyd times. They were too busy doing it properly to do nice campaigns and find a few token employees for the photograph opportunity. Because those who do it properly, they don't divest when the winds change because they know why they're doing it. So, yeah. Again, I could talk about this for hours. But yeah, it's natural to feel some of that hopelessness and powerlessness with everything that's going on. That's also a time for reflection and think about how you do this intentionally, sustainably, and in a way that is structured to give you both an opportunity to keep advancing things that are meaningful to you, but not to try and take on the whole world because that's not our job, you know? That's why I'm passionate about allyship because people who are not like doubly and triply marginalized have a bit more capacity to partner with us to accelerate some of this change. And actually, I think there's no more important time to think about how we close some of those gaps and actually get those individuals who do have institutional power, who do have influence over different things, to actually come and be active in this space. Because when we do collaborate, when there is some solidarity, when there is some unity, actually we can make a whole lot happen, even in the face of even in the face of chaos.
Saving our energy, making sure that we're controlling where it is that we are staying focused on, and just making sure that the impact continues to be felt even through these very, yeah, almost silly times. But it's the time and the season for, as you say, the cyclical shifts that always happens. Now that actually leads quite nicely to my next question, which was going to be about your work as founder and CEO of Male Allies UK, because you're very focused again on the goal of momentum through allyship. Can you just talk us through what your practical goals are within Male Allies UK?
Yeah, so for me, and I spent 2 years kind of launching and running pilots because what I was really interested in is lots of men just seem very passive, very apathetic, feel that they lack ability to engage in inclusion. And if we look at where, a lot of power and privilege lies, these things aren't binary. But there's a lot of men who have ability to be part of change making who don't really seem to do very much. So I've always thought, well, why is that? We all should have a cause, a purpose, something we want to advance. It might be something that is ignited by a lived experience or empathy for the lived experience of someone close to us, or a social, social issue that we want to really put our energy into fighting. We all benefit from having a purpose beyond the job we have, looking after our immediate family. We should all have something big as a human we want to, big, chunky, and scary, want to go and tackle. And humans thrive when they're in that position. Like from an evolutionary perspective, as humans, we always had some kind of big target to make happen. And nowadays, we have choice about that target because we've got so many wicked challenges as a species. It's not just about surviving anymore. We've created all sorts of problems. So for me, I was interested in, what can get, because again, I look at resource groups in organizations. I look at those kind of in activist positions, those who are setting up support networks for people who've been through trauma. And I'm looking in these spaces and I'm like, man, there's a hell of a lot of women in these spaces. Where the hell are all the men? And I'm like, well, I feel that all this work, all this change making, whether it be policy, whether it be activism, whether it be societal structures, whether it be institutional change, should be all genders coming together to accelerate this change. And I couldn't, and I was like, well, okay, so I do this, but why are so many other men not doing it? So that kind of made me think, okay, so what is stopping? I'm going to go out there and I'm going to speak to men because I've seen the gaps that exist due to gender in the workplace, due to race in the workplace. I've looked and thought across a whole range of different intersecting identities and what happens when your marginalization compounds. But I was just fascinated by the fact that so few men were truly engaged in this. So it's like, okay, let's actually look how we can firstly understand what the barriers are for men entering, what motivates them to enter, what happens to them when they do, what are the benefits of, picking up a social cause and going and allying with people who are already doing this, partnering with them, collaborating with them, not coming in and saving the day like some kind of hero or knight, which is a challenge because lots of men have grown up on stories of superheroes who, cities burning down, fly in with a cape, kick the bad guy's ass, save the day, everyone loves you, show no emotion. Like comic book heroes, movies, they're all create this narrative, and it's also very, very close to a level of supremacy because all those superheroes look the same. But that's for another webinar. Um, But there is that kind of feeling about how do you come and partner for change without taking up all the space? Because again, like men take up a hell of a lot of space, but in some ways also maybe don't change so much. Uh, if you are part of a diversity characteristic, it's funny how that does change. There's a lot more engagement when you are part of something, but how do we engage those who are not? And that's been the kind of the job of Male Eyes UK to look, how do we create those entry points? How do we recognize the barriers? How do we almost in some ways advertise the benefits? Because a lot of entry points to inclusion work is don't get it wrong. Examples of discrimination and harassment and oppression. And that's important from an educational perspective, but it doesn't make a very positive entry point for people who are looking to learn and people who are quite likely to make mistakes on that journey. Now, if you keep making the same mistake, you've got some work to do, and keep making the same mistake and harming people, that's not okay. But we do need to create spaces where people can get some of that foundational education so they feel a bit more confident. So again, it's something I could talk for hours about because it's my kind of day-to-day work. I wanted to know how can we bring allyship into the world today? It came in, to our vocabulary after George Floyd, but so many people still
It's
don't
true.
realize what it is and what it looks like. And I mean, it comes from the old French word allier, which means to combine, to unite, and to come together. And We live in a really divided and polarized world. What if we could build more bridges? What if we could start to close those gaps and divides? That requires both sides to move. Quite often we've only got one side moving. So for me, it was like, how do we activate this in the modern world? And I was really kind of focused on thinking, in my experience, people I was speaking to, especially, straight white men from higher socioeconomic groups who quite often had a position of relative power within their organizations as senior leaders. And I was like, what stops you? And they were like, I don't want to get it wrong. I don't want to look silly or incompetent or stupid or incapable. I don't want to upset people by messing it up. I don't want to overstep the mark. I don't want to be judged by other men as suddenly becoming woke or politically correct or sensitive or soft. And I don't want my reputation getting damaged and people saying, like, I need to get cancelled because I don't know what I'm doing. And there's lots and lots of feelings and sentiments from, people in that space around why they don't. And I'm just like, we've got a president of a country, possibly the most powerful president in the world. The guy wouldn't pass a DBS check. Like, you really have to worry that much. But we create space for them to explore this and realize that actually those worries are more on them. The fear is more in them than it is in reality. Trust me, there ain't no one getting cancelled. You know, even if you get cancelled, you come back 6 months later. And you're more likely to get cancelled if you're part of a marginalized group. Shock. Um, so yeah, so much of my work focuses on what allyship is today. And I talk about it a lot. Firstly, it's a verb. A lot of people say it's talking a good game. When I ask them what they're doing, silence. What's the impact? Not measured it. And secondly, how it is about true collaboration and partnership. And again, I kind of reiterate, allyship isn't charity. We're not doing those poor people a favor. We're not helping those poor souls. We're not helping those underprivileged people. It's about solidarity. Stand together and accelerate the good stuff we're already doing. Really align yourself with this change and find a way to bring your unique set of keys that you have. Open some of those doors because we've all got a unique set of keys. The truth is, some people's keychain got a lot of keys on. They can open up some serious doors with those keys. We've all got a unique keys for some doors. How do we support other people? Because when we come together, we got more keys to move through those doors. So yeah, allyship isn't this charity contribution. It's not charity, solidarity. And I think that's kind of the core of our work. So we work with a range of organisations. We engage men in inclusion. We understand what the barriers are, what the motivators are, what stops men engaging, and we create spaces for them to explore it in a non-judgmental way. And we also do some upskilling so people have got the foundations to be able to go and start to learn these skills because it's a skill. Allyship is a skill. It's a deep people skill. How do you bring together difference and create those spaces for high performance, for innovation, for barriers to be removed so people can garner their own momentum and have more autonomy to make change? It's all
It's
part.
very important work.
Yeah. Yeah. Lot to be said. Lots to be said.
No, no, no. I was going to say it's very important work because, like you say, if you don't create the spaces for people to feel safe enough to, especially given the the standards that we measure men against. We've put these standards out there, whether it's the singular I or the collective we, but somehow or the other, these standards exist, and we cannot ignore that we exist and we perpetuate them to an extent. So if men suddenly find themselves not wanting to fall foul of those standards, we cannot be surprised. So it's so important to give that space and the education and the safety for people to create their own momentum, especially when we keep screaming, oh, we need allies, we need allies, across the different areas where underrepresentation continues to exist. No, it's very, very important work. And honestly, there is just so much I had all these questions, especially from your book. But we're drilling down to the final few minutes, and I guess one last question for you regarding just positioning for the future for yourself and for people who are listening. I guess on the one hand, you're very future oriented and you're focused on impact. So how would you what last words would you give to anyone who's looking to re-energize for 2025? And then speaking for yourself, what are you building towards in 2025?
So, well, big question. So,
Too
you've
much? Too much?
oh no, no, you've taken the time to join me this evening, and I can only, thank you for that. Time is precious.
Honors ours.
Um, and yeah, so I think for me, obviously, we've got to be honest about the times that we're in. Uh, Lots of our feelings around that are valid. We definitely need to try and give ourselves a bit of grace and a bit of forgiveness. Like, I think that space for compassion for ourselves. Again, we hold ourselves up to such high standards. We're so passionate about making that difference, about being the ones that we can't see. I think sometimes we've just got to give ourselves that little bit of space. There's a chapter again in the book about how we do that in the small moments to give ourselves that chance to recharge and really connect to the things that energize us. And one thing I'm quite passionate about is in these times, it becomes even more important to create those cultural celebrations that energize us and connect us to our roots. Because there are people trying to pull some of those trees up. But actually, if we can root back in to those cultural traditions, cultural symbolism that just keeps us connected to our roots, people can't pull up the trees that we've got, no matter how hard they try. So that would be my one thing to take away in these times. And for myself, well, I'm on a bit of a book tour. I'm heading to London and to Newcastle and to Birmingham. So, if you're out and about, follow us on LinkedIn and maybe I might see you at one of those events. But I'm focused on building Male Eyes UK. I'm very much focused on supporting boys in schools, which is our social output from our business because I do think boys in schools from all demographic perspectives are struggling in different ways. But it's not a particularly glamorous topic or a thing that government or policymakers really care about that much. Uh, and I think especially when I think about some of the black boys that we work with, they're stuck in this kind of awful cycle of being expected to be quite hyper masculine. They're judged and adultified really quickly. So their expectations of society are seeing them as a man, but they're only like 12, 13, 14. And the very, barriers that impact us from a racial perspective stop them from achieving the things that they're expected to do as men. And it creates these awful cycles where they are kind of marginalized and the voices are never heard of their struggles. And then we see the impact on mental health and we see the impact on engagement in activities that are not energizing but reductive. So yeah, continuing to create space for those conversations and create channels for change, and really create an output so that people can see a different version of masculinity is possible than some of the narratives that are out there on the internet at the minute, polluting young people's minds with unrealistic expectations and yeah, kind of reductive ways of operating. But we'll be expanding out to Europe at some point this year as well. So there's lots of exciting developments too.
That's incredible. And I strongly encourage as many people who are listening and looking for, just little spaces to impact, please um follow Lee on his social media handles, LinkedIn, etc. Be part of the work. It's very important. It's in the background, but it is building a different kind of momentum in young lives and also in other people's, just very sheltered realities. So thank you so much for making time for today's talk, Lee.